The morning sun bathed Graceful Redemption Pentecostal Church in Atlanta, casting a warm glow through its stained glass windows. Inside, the congregation swayed to the rhythm of the gospel music, their voices raised in harmonious joy. At the altar, Pastor Jeremiah Atkins stood tall, his commanding presence drawing every eye. As he prepared to deliver his sermon, no one in the church could have known that this seemingly ordinary Sunday service would soon spiral into an unimaginable scene of violence, forever altering the lives of everyone present. Pastor Jeremiah opened his Bible, ready to begin, when suddenly the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church flew open with a violent force. A woman's voice, filled with a mix of rage and desperation, sliced through the music like a blade. "Jeremiah, you can't ignore us anymore." The congregation froze, gasps echoing through the sanctuary. There, framed in the doorway, stood Sheila Johnson. Her wild, furious eyes met those of the congregation, and in her trembling hand, she gripped a gun. Before anyone could process the situation, the deafening sound of 3 gunshots rang through the church. The noise bounced off the stone walls, a chilling echo that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Pastor Jeremiah staggered backward, crimson stains blooming on his crisp white shirt as he collapsed. His wife Isabella's heart-wrenching scream tore through the air, a raw, emotional sound that would haunt the congregation for years to come. Chaos erupted. People screamed and scrambled for cover as the truth behind the attack began to unfold. But in that instant, one question hung heavy in the air. How had it come to this? Jeremiah Atkins hadn't always been destined for the pulpit. Growing up in the tough neighborhoods of South Atlanta, he had witnessed more than his fair share of hardship. As a teenager, he ran with a rough crowd, flirting with petty crime and the kind of thrills that came with a dangerous lifestyle. But beneath the bravado and the tough exterior, there was always something different about Jeremiah, a spark of charisma, a gift for words that could captivate an audience. It was his grandmother, Mama Hester, who first saw his potential. A pillar of their local church community, Mama Hester never gave up on her wayward grandson. "Boy," she'd say, fixing him with her stern gaze, "the Lord's got plans for you. You just need to open your eyes and see it." For years, her words fell on deaf ears. But everything changed one night when Jeremiah narrowly survived a drive-by shooting that claimed his best friend's life. As he knelt in the cold pavement, cradling his dying friend in his arms, something inside him shifted. In that moment, he felt an undeniable presence, a calling that he couldn't explain. The very next Sunday, to the surprise of his family and friends, Jeremiah walked into church on his own. Sitting in the back pew, tears streaming down his face, he listened as the pastor spoke of redemption and second chances. From that day on, everything changed for Jeremiah Atkins. He threw himself into Bible study with the same passion he had once poured into street hustles. His natural charm, which had once helped him talk his way out of trouble, now drew people to him as he shared his testimony. It wasn't long before he was leading youth groups and giving guest sermons. By the time he was 25, Jeremiah had completed his theological studies and been ordained as a minister. His rise within the church was nothing short of meteoric. People were drawn to his passionate sermons, his ability to connect the Bible to modern struggles, and his boundless energy for community outreach. At 30, Jeremiah founded Graceful Redemption Pentecostal Church. Starting with just a handful of followers meeting in a rented storefront, the church grew rapidly, driven by Jeremiah's magnetic personality and his powerful message of hope and second chances. In a community that had faced more than its share of hardship, his words resonated deeply, inspiring many to find new faith and hope. 5 years later, Graceful Redemption had blossomed into one of Atlanta's most vibrant and fastest-growing churches. The new building, with its soaring ceilings and state-of-the-art facilities, stood as a testament to Pastor Jeremiah's vision and the unwavering support of his congregation. But even as his church flourished, the personal and emotional burdens Jeremiah carried would soon collide with the harsh reality of his past. And one Sunday morning, everything would fall apart in the most unexpected and tragic way. To the outside world, Pastor Jeremiah Atkins was the epitome of a modern religious leader. Dynamic, relatable, and deeply committed to his congregation, he was the kind of leader people looked up to. His sermons were broadcast on local radio, and his social media following was growing rapidly. He was a regular at community events, always ready with a kind word, a helping hand, or a word of encouragement for those in need. To many, he was the perfect picture of a man who had it all: faith, purpose, and an unwavering dedication to his church and community. But beneath the polished exterior and behind the inspiring sermons, Jeremiah carried a secret that threatened to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. This secret went by the name of Sheila Johnson. Sheila was everything Jeremiah wasn't supposed to want: fierce, unpredictable, and with a temper that could ignite in an instant. She was the complete opposite of the calm and controlled image that Jeremiah presented to the world. Yet, from the moment they crossed paths, there was an undeniable attraction, a pull that defied all logic and good sense. Their worlds collided at a local community center where Jeremiah volunteered, mentoring at-risk youth. Sheila was there to pick up her younger brother, who was part of the program. She stormed in, full of attitude, ready to confront whoever had kept her waiting. But when her eyes met Jeremiah's, something shifted. In that instant, there was an undeniable spark between them. Jeremiah, still a few years away from founding his church, was immediately captivated by Sheila's raw energy and unapologetic nature. She, in turn, was intrigued by this man who radiated peace and purpose, qualities she had never encountered before. Their connection ignited quickly, burning hot and fast. Sheila was unlike anyone Jeremiah had ever met. She challenged him, pushed him out of his comfort zone, and made him feel alive in ways he had forgotten were possible. For a time, Jeremiah convinced himself that this was what he needed: someone to keep him grounded, someone to remind him of the world he had left behind. But as the weeks turned into months, the cracks in their relationship began to show. Sheila's temper, which had once seemed exciting and passionate, began to escalate. She became possessive, prone to jealous outbursts, leaving Jeremiah walking on eggshells. More than once, he found himself covering bruises, making excuses to concerned friends about the scratches on his arms. Still, he couldn't bring himself to end things. There was something vulnerable beneath Sheila's tough exterior, a deep need for love and acceptance that resonated with Jeremiah's own past. He told himself that he could help her, that with enough patience and understanding, she would change. But then everything shifted. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Sheila stormed out of Jeremiah's apartment. Hours later, he received a call from the hospital. Sheila had been in a car accident. Thankfully, she was okay, but there was more. She was pregnant. The news hit Jeremiah like a bolt of lightning. A baby. His baby. In that moment, everything he had planned, everything he had envisioned for his future, seemed to crumble around him. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he couldn't marry Sheila. Her volatile nature, her unpredictability, this was no environment in which to raise a child, let alone build a life together. But neither could he abandon his child. So, Jeremiah made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He would support Sheila and their baby financially, but he would keep them hidden from his public life. It was a compromise, but a compromise that satisfied no one, least of all his own conscience. As Sheila's pregnancy progressed, Jeremiah's star continued to rise within the church community. He threw himself fully into building Graceful Redemption Church, crafting his public image and working tirelessly to expand his congregation. All the while, he kept Sheila and their child a closely guarded secret. Their meetings were held in out-of-the-way places, always with a sense of urgency, always looking over his shoulder. Sheila, for her part, oscillated between rage at being kept hidden and a desperate hope that Jeremiah would one day change his mind. The birth of their daughter, Zoe, complicated things further. When Jeremiah held his child for the first time, he was moved beyond words. But it also cemented his resolve. He couldn't let his past mistakes derail the good work he was doing through his ministry. the lives he was changing, the people he was helping. And so, a pattern was established. Jeremiah lived two lives, one as the public face of graceful redemption, the other as a man trying to keep his secret world from collapsing. Despite his outward success, the weight of the lies, the duplicity, and the distance between his personal and public lives grew heavier with each passing day. As his ministry flourished and his fame grew, the tension between his two worlds became increasingly difficult to manage. But through it all, one thing remained certain: Jeremiah's commitment to his congregation and the church he had built. His passion for his ministry kept him moving forward, even as the strain of his hidden life threatened to tear everything apart. The secret father, burdened with guilt and cash, continued his visits, leaving behind nothing but a growing weight on his conscience. Sheila, caught in a web of resentment and dependency, watched from the shadows as the man she loved, Pastor Jeremiah Atkins, evolved into a celebrated figure, always just out of her reach. It was an untenable situation, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark would come in the form of Isabella, a woman who would unknowingly set off a chain of events that would end in bloodshed on the altar of graceful redemption. Isabella Green was everything that Sheila Johnson was not. Gentle, soft-spoken, and with a serene presence that seemed to soothe everyone around her, Isabella embodied the kind of partner that Pastor Jeremiah believed he needed, not just for himself, but also for his growing congregation. They met at a regional church conference where Jeremiah was a guest speaker. Isabella, a devoted member of her own church and active in various ministry programs, was immediately drawn to the charismatic young pastor. His words spoke directly to her heart, igniting a passion for service she'd always felt but never fully expressed. For Jeremiah, Isabella represented the life he had convinced himself he deserved, a life free from the chaos and unpredictability that had defined his relationship with Sheila. Isabella's unwavering faith, her gentle spirit, and her genuine desire to serve others aligned perfectly with the image Jeremiah was cultivating as the leader of graceful redemption. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared prayers, long conversations about faith and purpose, and dreams of building a powerful ministry together. Isabella saw in Jeremiah a man of God, someone who had overcome a troubled past to become a beacon of hope for others. She felt blessed to be chosen by such a man, never suspecting the secrets that lay beneath his polished exterior. But as their relationship deepened, Jeremiah began to wrestle with guilt. Even as he fell deeper in love with Isabella, he knew he should tell her about Sheila and their daughter, Zoe. But fear held him back. Fear of losing everything he had worked for. Fear of disappointing the woman who looked at him with such adoration and respect. So, he convinced himself that his past was just that, past. Moving forward with Isabella, he told himself, was God's plan for his life. Their wedding was the event of the season in Atlanta's church community. Graceful redemption was packed to the rafters as Pastor Jeremiah and Isabella exchanged vows before God and their congregation. The couple glowed with happiness and purpose, a shining example of Christian love and partnership. As Isabella settled into her role as the pastor's wife, she threw herself into the work of the church with boundless enthusiasm. She started new outreach programs, counseled young couples, and became a beloved figure in her own right among the congregation. Her genuine warmth and compassion complemented Jeremiah's dynamic preaching style perfectly. Together, they were a power couple in the truest sense. Graceful redemption flourished under their leadership, expanding its reach and influence throughout Atlanta and beyond. They were featured in Christian magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and held up as role models for young people in the community. But even as Jeremiah basked in the glow of his picture-perfect life, the shadow of his past loomed ever larger. Sheila, watching from afar as the man she considered hers built a life with another woman, grew increasingly bitter and unstable. The payments Jeremiah sent for Zoe's care were no longer enough to placate her. She wanted more money, more time, more acknowledgement. Isabella, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, just out of sight, continued to support her husband in all his endeavors. She noticed occasional moments of distraction or worry in Jeremiah's demeanor, but she attributed them to the stress of leading such a large and growing congregation. Her faith in him never wavered. As months turned to years, however, Jeremiah found himself trapped in an increasingly precarious situation. While the church continued to grow, so did the tensions from his past. Jeremiah was torn between the life he had built with Isabella, a life of stability, success, and faith, and the life he had left behind with Sheila, who still demanded his attention. The weight of his secrets began to gnaw at him. He could no longer deny the cracks in his carefully crafted world. Every day, he lived with the knowledge that the foundation he had built his life upon was built on lies. But the fear of losing everything, the church, his wife, and his place in the community, kept him silent. The pressure continued to mount. Sheila, left in the shadows and consumed by her resentment, watched from afar, always hoping for a chance to reclaim the life she thought was hers. The strain of maintaining two worlds began to take its toll on Jeremiah, but he couldn't bring himself to confront the truth of his situation. His love for Isabella, his commitment to his ministry, and his responsibility to his daughter and Sheila created a tangled web that was becoming impossible to escape. The calm, serene life Jeremiah had once envisioned for himself was slipping further and further from his grasp. And as Sheila's bitterness festered and grew, and as Jeremiah's guilt deepened, the stage was set for a confrontation that would forever alter the course of their lives. The man who had once been a beacon of hope and redemption was now facing the consequences of the secrets he had kept hidden for so long. Jeremiah Atkins had always managed to balance the two lives he had built for himself. But now, with every passing day, the weight of his deception grew heavier. On one side, there was his thriving ministry, a congregation that adored him, and his devoted wife, Isabella. On the other side, there was Sheila, his volatile ex-lover, and their daughter, Zoe, whom he saw only in secret. Jeremiah told himself he was doing the right thing, protecting everyone involved by keeping these two worlds separate. But the lies, the omissions to Isabella, and the furtive meetings with Sheila were beginning to wear him down. The moral quagmire he found himself in was like quicksand. Every step he took, every decision, pulled him deeper into the mess of his own making. As the pressure mounted from both sides, he began to withdraw. Long hours spent alone in his study, ostensibly working on his sermons, but in reality, battling the guilt and shame that weighed heavily on his soul. Isabella, sensing the growing distance between them, redoubled her efforts to support him. She organized prayer circles, took on more responsibilities at the church, and threw herself into the anniversary celebration preparations. Anything to ease the burden she believed he carried as a spiritual leader. But her unwavering devotion only deepened Jeremiah's sense of guilt and unworthiness. He couldn't help but feel suffocated. Sheila's increasing demands for attention, money, and time were becoming impossible to ignore. At the same time, Isabella's concerned attentiveness only made him feel more like a fraud. He knew in his heart that a reckoning was coming, a moment when everything would come crashing down. But what he couldn't have imagined was the violent form that reckoning would take and the devastating consequences it would have on everyone he loved. The cracks in Pastor Jeremiah's carefully constructed facade began to show one warm Sunday in late spring. Graceful Redemption was abuzz with excitement for the upcoming anniversary celebration marking 5 years since its founding. Isabella had thrown herself into planning, coordinating volunteers, arranging guest speakers, and organizing a community outreach event to coincide with the festivities. Jeremiah, however, seemed distracted and on edge. His usual passionate sermons felt flat and uninspired. Isabella noticed dark circles under his eyes, the tightness in his shoulders, a clear sign of sleepless nights and burdens that weighed heavily on him. One evening, her voice soft with concern, she asked, "Is everything all right, my love? You seem distant lately." Jeremiah forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just feeling the weight of responsibility, dear," he replied. This anniversary, it's a big milestone for us. I want everything to be perfect. Isabella wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded, squeezing his hand reassuringly. We're in this together. Remember, whatever burdens you're carrying, let me help bear them. Her words, meant to comfort him, only intensified the guilt churning in Jeremiah's gut. If only she knew the true nature of the burden he carried. While Isabella supported him in every way she could, behind the scenes, Jeremiah's world was unraveling quickly. Sheila had become increasingly erratic in her demands. No longer satisfied with the monthly payments and occasional visits, she now wanted more money, more time with Jeremiah, more acknowledgement of her place in his life. Their most recent meeting had ended in a screaming match, with Sheila threatening to expose everything to the church if Jeremiah didn't leave Isabella and publicly claim her and Zoe as his family. You can't keep us hidden forever, Jeremiah, Sheila had yelled, her eyes wild with a mix of pain and rage. I'm tired of being your dirty little secret. Either you man up and do right by us, or I swear to God, I'll burn your whole perfect life to the ground. Jeremiah had left that encounter shaken to his core. He knew Sheila well enough to understand that she wasn't bluffing. The careful balance he had maintained for years was teetering on the brink of collapse. As the anniversary celebration drew nearer, Jeremiah's behavior became increasingly erratic. He canceled meetings last minute, disappeared for hours without explanation, and snapped at church staff over minor issues. The congregation began to whisper, concern and confusion spreading like ripples in a pond. Isabella, ever the loyal wife, ran interference as best she could. She smoothed ruffled feathers, made excuses for her husband's absences, and prayed fervently for whatever was troubling him to pass. But even she couldn't deny the tension that had begun to fill the air. The once easy, joyful rhythm of their marriage was slipping away, replaced by an undercurrent of strain and unresolved conflict. Jeremiah knew the truth, that his double life was unsustainable. The weight of his lies was bearing down on him, suffocating him with every passing day. What he had once believed was manageable, a balancing act of love and responsibility, was now a dangerous game with no clear end. As the anniversary celebration loomed, he couldn't escape the feeling that everything he had worked so hard to build was about to come crashing down. The reckoning was coming, and it would change everything. But the question remained, would it be a peaceful resolution, or would the explosive tension finally spill over in the most devastating way possible? Jeremiah could no longer run from the truth. Isabella's seemingly boundless patience was beginning to wear thin. The situation reached a boiling point 2 days before the anniversary celebration. Jeremiah had promised to meet with the event planning committee to finalize details, but he was nowhere to be found. Calls to his cell phone went straight to voicemail. Fighting down a rising sense of panic, Isabella decided to check his study. As she approached the door, she heard his voice, low and urgent. He was on the phone, his tone one she'd never heard before, desperate, pleading. Sheila, please, you have to understand. I can't just walk away from everything. There has to be another way. Isabella froze, her hand resting on the doorknob. Sheila? Who was Sheila? And what was Jeremiah talking about? Walking away from? Her mind spun, trying to make sense of the words she had just overheard. As Jeremiah continued, oblivious to her presence just outside the door, he said, No, listen to me. I'll figure something out, okay? I'll increase the payments. Just please give me more time. Don't do anything rash. The blood drained from Isabella's face as the implications of what she was hearing began to sink in. Payments, more time. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. But the one conclusion that lingered was inescapable. Her husband, the man she had built her life around, was hiding something monumental from her. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open. Jeremiah spun around, the phone still clutched to his ear, his face a mask of shock and guilt. Isabella, he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. I can explain. But in that moment, looking into her husband's eyes, Isabella knew that no explanation could undo the betrayal she felt. Whatever Jeremiah was about to say, Whatever justifications he might offer, nothing would ever be the same again. The truth spilled out, haltingly at first, then in a torrent of confession and apology. As the words poured from him, Isabella felt her world crumbling around her. The perfect life she thought she had, the blessed union she believed God had orchestrated, it was all built on a foundation of lies. Meanwhile, across town, Sheila Johnson paced her small apartment, rage and hurt warring within her. Jeremiah's pleas for more time, his continued refusal to acknowledge her and Zoe publicly, had pushed her to the breaking point. As she looked at her daughter, peacefully coloring at the kitchen table, unaware of the turmoil surrounding her, something inside Sheila snapped. No more waiting, she muttered, her eyes falling on the drawer where she kept the gun Jeremiah had insisted she keep for protection. No more hiding in the shadows. In that moment, as Isabella's world fell apart in the study of graceful redemption, Sheila made a fateful decision in her rundown apartment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. The carefully constructed facade of Pastor Jeremiah Atkins was about to come crashing down in the most public and violent way possible. The morning of Graceful Redemption's 5th anniversary dawned bright and clear, a beautiful day that seemed to promise joy and celebration. But within the walls of the church, and in two very different households across Atlanta, storm clouds were gathering. Isabella had barely slept, her mind reeling from the revelations of the previous day, the existence of Sheila and Zoe, the years of deception, the double life her husband had been leading. It was almost too much to process. She spent the night alternating between bouts of angry tears and fervent prayers for guidance. Jeremiah, for his part, looked like a man who had aged a decade overnight. The weight of his sins, long carried in secret, now bore down on him with crushing force. He had spent hours trying to explain, trying to justify his actions. But Isabella's silence, her look of utter devastation, cut deeper than any words could have. As the first light of dawn crept through their bedroom window, Isabella stirred from her fitful sleep. She looked at Jeremiah, the man she thought she knew so well, and felt a complex mix of emotions: love, hurt, anger, confusion. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Jeremiah sat up, running a hand over his face. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice filled with resignation. "But we have to get through today. The church, they're all expecting us. We can't let them down." A bitter laugh escaped Jeremiah, a hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Let them down," he muttered, "like you've let me down, like you've let God down." His words stung, but he couldn't argue. He deserved every ounce of her anger and more. "You're right," he said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "I failed. I failed you. I failed our congregation. I failed in my duty as a man of God. But please, Isabella, let me try to make this right. After the service today, I'll confess everything to the church elders. I'll step down if that's what it takes. Just let me get through this day." Isabella stood silent for a long moment, her mind heavy with the weight of his words. She was torn between the desire to support her husband, whom she had once admired, and the betrayal that had shattered her trust. Finally, she nodded, her face setting into a mask of resolve. "For the sake of the congregation, for the people who believe in us and the work we do," she said, her voice firm, "I'll stand beside you today. But after that, I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Meanwhile, across town, in a small, cluttered apartment, Sheila Johnson was preparing for the day ahead, but her preparations were of a very different nature. Her movements were quick, almost frantic, as she packed her things with a mix of determination and desperation. Her eyes sparkled with a dangerous energy as she focused, her every action loaded with purpose. Zoe, sensing the tension in the air, watched her mother wearily. "Mama, where are we going?" she asked, her small voice filled with concern. Sheila paused in her packing, forcing a smile for her daughter. "We're going to see your daddy, baby. It's time he introduced us to everyone." As she spoke, her hand brushed against the cold metal of the gun tucked inside her purse. A chill ran down her spine, but she shoved the doubt aside. This was it. No more hiding, no more empty promises. One way or another, Jeremiah was going to face the truth today. Back at Graceful Redemption, the church was filling up quickly. The anniversary celebration had drawn a larger crowd than usual, with visitors from other congregations and community leaders in attendance. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as people found their seats, the chatter mixing with the sweet hum of anticipation. Backstage, in the small room where he usually prepared for services, Jeremiah knelt in prayer. His usual words flowed easily, but today they came in broken, desperate whispers. "Lord, I have sinned. I have strayed so far from your path. Please give me strength. Show me the way forward." A soft knock on the door interrupted his prayer. It was Isabella, her face composed, but her eyes still reflecting the pain of betrayal. "It's time," she said simply. Jeremiah nodded, rising to his feet. As he moved to follow her, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. The man staring back at him seemed like a stranger, hollow-eyed, burdened, a far cry from the confident, charismatic leader his congregation knew. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and stepped out onto the stage. The familiar swell of music filled the air as the expectant faces of his flock turned toward him. The weight of the moment felt surreal, as though he were moving through a fog. Isabella took her usual seat in the front row, her smile firmly in place despite the storm swirling inside her heart. As Jeremiah began to speak, welcoming everyone to this special service, he couldn't escape the overwhelming guilt gnawing at him. He spoke of God's faithfulness, of the blessings bestowed upon Graceful Redemption over the past 5 years. All the while, he knew that his own faithlessness threatened to bring it all crashing down. Halfway through his sermon, as he was building toward what should have been an inspiring crescendo, the doors at the back of the church burst open with a bang that echoed through the sanctuary. Every head turned, and a collective gasp rose from the congregation. There, framed in the doorway, stood Sheila Johnson, her eyes wild, her chest heaving with emotion. In one hand, she clutched the hand of a confused-looking little girl. In the other, she held a gun. Jeremiah's blood ran cold as he registered the glint of metal. Sheila had a gun. "Jeremiah!" she screamed, her voice raw with pain and rage. "No more lies. No more hiding. It's time everyone knew the truth." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jeremiah stood frozen at the pulpit, his mouth open but no words coming out. Isabella, her face a mask of shock, looked from Sheila to her husband, the full reality of the situation crashing over her like a tidal wave. She had known for some time that their lives were built on a fragile foundation, but now, in front of the congregation, everything they had built was about to crumble. The situation shattered in a blur of motion and sound, chaos consuming the church as Sheila advanced down the aisle, the gun now raised and aimed directly at Jeremiah. People scrambled to get out of her way, screams and shouts filling the air. Some ran for the exits, while others stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. "Sheila, please." Jeremiah finally found his voice, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Think about what you're doing. Think about Zoe." At the mention of her daughter's name, Sheila's face twisted with fury. Don't you dare use her name," she screamed. "You've denied her for years, kept us hidden like we're something to be ashamed of." Now standing at the front of the church, mere feet away from Jeremiah, Sheila's anger was palpable. Isabella, acting on instinct, began to rise from her seat, but Sheila swung the gun in her direction. "Stay right there," she snarled. "This is between me and your precious pastor." Isabella froze, her eyes wide with fear. It wasn't for herself that she feared, but for her husband. Despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Jeremiah, seeing the gun pointed at his wife, felt a surge of protective anger. "Sheila, this is madness. Put the gun down. We can talk about this," he pleaded. Sheila laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Talk? That's all you ever do, Jeremiah. Talk, and make promises you never keep. Well, I'm done talking. I'm done waiting. It's time for action. She turned back to the congregation, many of whom were watching in horrified silence. "You all think you know this man," Sheila shouted, her voice shaking with emotion. "Your beloved Pastor Jeremiah. But you don't know him at all." Her hand tightened around Zoe, pulling the terrified little girl closer to her side. "This is his daughter. My daughter. The child he's been hiding from all of you for years." A collective gasp rippled through the congregation as their eyes darted between Sheila, the frightened child, and their pastor, searching for any sign of truth or denial. Jeremiah, realizing his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, made a choice. "No more lies. No more hiding," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I have a daughter. I've been living a lie, deceiving all of you, deceiving my wife." His eyes turned to Isabella, tears welling in them. "I'm so sorry for everything." For a moment, it seemed like his confession might diffuse the situation. Sheila's hand, still gripping the gun, lowered slightly, but her face hardened once more. "Sorry isn't enough," she spat. "Sorry doesn't feed our child. Sorry doesn't make up for years of being treated like your dirty little secret." With those words, she raised the gun again, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You had your chance, Jeremiah. Now it's too late." Tom seemed to slow down. Jeremiah saw Sheila's fingers squeeze the trigger, heard Isabella scream, and saw her lunge forward as if to shield him. Then pain exploded in his chest as the first shot rang out. He staggered backward, his hand clutching at the growing red stain on his shirt. Two more shots followed in quick succession, and Jeremiah felt his legs give way. He collapsed to the floor of the altar, dimly aware of the chaos erupting around him. Isabella was at his side in an instant, pressing her hands desperately against his wounds, her tears falling onto his face. "Jeremiah, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, God, don't take him." Through the haze of pain and encroaching darkness, Jeremiah saw Sheila standing over him. The gun hung limply at her side, and her face was a mask of shock, as though she couldn't quite believe what she had just done. "I just wanted you to love us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the screams and the commotion filling the church. As consciousness began to slip away, Jeremiah's last coherent thought was a prayer, not for himself, but for the people he'd hurt. For Isabella, for Sheila, for Zoe, for his congregation. He prayed for forgiveness, for healing, for a way forward through the mess he'd created. Then, as sirens wailed in the distance and the world faded to black, Pastor Jeremiah Atkins surrendered himself to the judgment of a higher power. The shots that rang out that morning would forever echo through the walls of graceful redemption. The church, once a beacon of hope and faith, was now a place where tragedy had struck with unrelenting force. The events that unfolded at Graceful Redemption Church that Sunday morning sent shockwaves through the entire community, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Pastor Jeremiah Atkins, once the charismatic leader of a thriving congregation, now lay in a hospital bed, his life hanging in the balance. The doctors had managed to stabilize him, but his condition remained critical. 3 bullet wounds, 2 to his chest and 1 to his abdomen, had caused severe damage, and it would be days before anyone could determine if he would survive, let alone recover. Isabella, her clothes still stained with her husband's blood, remained vigilant at his bedside. Her world had been shattered twice in as many days, first by the shocking revelations of Jeremiah's infidelity and secret child, and then by the violent attack that had nearly claimed his life. She fluctuated between grief, anger, and a desperate, clinging hope that somehow they could find a way through this nightmare together. Meanwhile, Sheila Johnson was in police custody, charged with attempted murder and several other offenses. The image of her standing in the church doorway, gun in hand, was plastered across every news outlet in Atlanta. To some, she was a villain, a scorned woman who resorted to violence in a fit of jealous rage. To others, her story resonated. A single mother betrayed and abandoned, pushed to the brink by years of secrecy and broken promises. Zoe, the innocent child caught in the middle of it all, had been taken into protective custody. Social services were working to locate her nearest relatives, but the process was complicated by the sudden and public revelation of her paternity. The young girl was confused and frightened, desperately missing her mother, unable to comprehend the gravity of what had happened. The congregation of Graceful Redemption was left reeling, their faith shaken to its core. The church that had once been a beacon of hope and redemption now stood as a crime scene, with yellow police tape starkly contrasting the celebratory banners that still hung limply from its walls. In the days that followed, a flurry of revelations came to light. Financial records revealed years of payments from Jeremiah to Sheila, funds siphoned from the church through a complex web of accounts. Church elders, investigating further, uncovered a pattern of deception that went beyond just the secret family. There were questionable real estate deals, inflated expense reports, and a lifestyle that didn't align with the modest pastor's salary Jeremiah had always claimed. The media descended like vultures, eager to pick apart every detail of the scandal. Reporters camped outside the hospital, the church, and even Isabella's home, hungry for any new development or statement. The story had all the elements of a sensational headline: sex, lies, violence, all set against the backdrop of a supposedly righteous religious community. For Isabella, the constant scrutiny was almost unbearable. She had gone from being the admired wife of a respected pastor to an object of pity and speculation overnight. People whispered behind her back, wondering how she could have been so blind and debating whether she had known about Jeremiah's deceptions all along. Despite the betrayal and the public humiliation, Isabella found herself unable to completely turn her back on the man she had loved for so long. She prayed fervently for his recovery, even as she grappled with the question of whether their marriage could survive this ordeal. 1 week after the shooting, with Jeremiah still unconscious, Isabella finally agreed to meet with Sheila's court-appointed lawyer. It was a difficult decision, one that went against the advice of friends and family who thought she should focus solely on her own healing. But Isabella felt compelled to understand, to hear the other side of the story that had so dramatically upended her life. The meeting took place in a small conference room at the courthouse, under the watchful eye of a court officer. Sheila, handcuffed and wearing a prison jumpsuit, looked a far cry from the wild-eyed woman who had stormed into the church with a gun in hand. Her eyes, now tired and filled with a mixture of regret and bitterness, betrayed the anger and pain that had driven her to such extreme measures. As Isabella sat across from Sheila, the weight of the situation hit her. Here, in front of her, was the woman who had shattered her world, who had torn apart the life she thought she knew. Yet, despite everything, Isabella couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy for Sheila. The years of secrecy, the broken promises, and the betrayal Sheila had endured seemed to have pushed her beyond the point of no return. Sheila's voice cracked as she spoke, explaining her actions. "I loved him. I gave everything for him," she said, her words heavy with pain. "I just wanted him to love us, to stop pretending we didn't exist." Isabella listened in silence, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth. Sheila's words were laced with years of hurt and frustration, but they did little to undo the damage that had been done. As the conversation continued, Isabella found herself trapped between sympathy for a woman who had suffered and the undeniable reality of the betrayal that had left her life in ruins. The meeting, though difficult, offered no answers, only more questions. But for Isabella, it was a step toward understanding, even if it didn't bring closure. She knew that there was no easy way forward, but she also knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only path to healing. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow, reflecting a mix of regret and resignation. For a long, quiet moment, the two women simply stared at one another, the weight of their shared connection to Jeremiah hanging heavily in the air between them. "I'm sorry," Sheila finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the broken promises, watching him build this perfect life while Zoe and I struggled. Isabella listened intently, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. Part of her wanted to lash out, to unleash all the pain and anger she had been holding inside. But another part of her recognized the broken woman before her as yet another victim of Jeremiah's lies. "I'm not here to judge you, Sheila," Isabella said softly. "I can't condone what you did, but I think I'm starting to understand why you did it. We've both been deceived by the same man." Sheila's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her face. She hadn't expected understanding, let alone empathy, from the woman whose life she had so violently disrupted. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Sheila's voice cracked. "I just wanted Jeremiah to acknowledge us, to give Zoe the father she deserves. But every time I threatened to tell the truth, he'd make more promises, send more money, and nothing would change." Isabella nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a murmur. "How long has this been going on?" Sheila sighed, her shoulders sagging. "We met before he founded the church, before you. Zoe was born just after Graceful Redemption opened its doors. For a while I thought he'd leave it all behind for us. But then he met you, and suddenly we were a problem to be managed, not a family to be embraced." The weight of this revelation hit Isabella like a thunderclap. Her entire relationship with Jeremiah, the very foundation of their life together, had been built on a lie. She felt a fresh wave of anger at her husband, at Sheila, and at the circumstances that had led them all to this point. "What happens now?" Isabella asked, more to herself than to Sheila. Sheila shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know. I've ruined everything. Zoe, oh God, what have I done to my baby girl?" For the first time since the shooting, Isabella felt a spark of purpose ignite within her. Whatever sins Jeremiah and Sheila had committed, whatever pain they had caused, there was an innocent child caught in the middle. Zoe shouldn't suffer for her parents' mistakes. "Zoe won't suffer," Isabella said firmly, a new resolve in her voice. "Whatever happens with the legal proceedings, whatever happens with Jeremiah, I'll make sure she's taken care of." Sheila looked at her in disbelief. "Why would you do that, after everything?" Isabella met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because, in a way, we're connected now. Not just through Jeremiah, but through this shared experience of betrayal and pain. We can let it destroy us, or we can find a way to move forward." As the meeting drew to a close, both women felt the weight of unspoken questions and uncertain futures. But there was also a glimmer of something else, something fragile but real. A tentative understanding, a shared resolve to find healing. Not just for themselves, but for the innocent child caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement, their cameras flashing as Isabella emerged. But for the first time since the scandal broke, she faced them with a sense of calm determination. "I have no comment at this time," she said firmly, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I ask that you respect the privacy of all involved, especially the children affected by this situation. Thank you." As she walked away, her head held high, Isabella felt a subtle shift within herself. The path ahead was far from clear, but she was no longer simply a victim of circumstances. She was a woman determined to forge her own way forward, to find redemption, not in the hollow promises of a flawed man, but in her own capacity for compassion and resilience. Back at the hospital, Jeremiah Atkins lay still, machines beeping with a steady rhythm around him. His physical wounds were slowly healing, but the true extent of the damage he had caused to his family, his community, and himself was still unknown. The world Jeremiah Atkins had so carefully built began to crumble as he hovered between life and death, leaving those he had betrayed to pick up the pieces. The revelations surrounding Graceful Redemption Church continued to unfold, exposing layers of deception far beyond Jeremiah's secret family. As the days turned to weeks, the scandal grew larger, pulling everyone involved into the chaos. The church elders, working closely with forensic accountants, uncovered a web of financial misdeeds that painted a damning portrait of the man who had once been seen as a spiritual leader. It turned out that Jeremiah's charisma and persuasive skills extended far beyond the pulpit. He had created a network of wealthy donors, promising them spiritual guidance and divine favor in exchange for substantial offerings. These donations, however, found their way into his personal accounts. The money trail led to offshore bank accounts, luxury purchases kept hidden from the public eye, and a series of real estate investments that had nothing to do with the church's business. For the congregation, each new revelation was another gut punch to their faith. Many struggled to reconcile the man they had followed and admired with the fraudster now exposed in the media. Some desperately clung to their belief in Jeremiah's fundamental goodness, convinced there must be some explanation or justification for his actions. Others felt deeply betrayed and angry, their trust not just in their pastor, but in the institution of the church itself shaken to its very core. Isabella, still reeling from the personal betrayal, found herself thrust into a leadership role she never anticipated. With Jeremiah unconscious and the church in turmoil, she became the spokesperson for graceful redemption, working tirelessly to hold the community together and ensure the continuation of the church's charitable efforts despite the scandal. It was exhausting, often thankless work. She faced skepticism from those who questioned how she had been unaware of her husband's deception and resentment from those who blamed her for not keeping him on a righteous path. But Isabella found strength in an unexpected source, her growing relationship with Zoe. True to her word, Isabella had ensured that Sheila and Jeremiah's daughter was cared for. Working closely with social services, she arranged for Zoe to stay with Jeremiah's sister, Angela, a kind-hearted woman who had been just as shocked as everyone else by the revelations about her brother. Isabella visited Zoe regularly, slowly building a bond with the confused and frightened little girl. She found solace in Zoe's innocence, in the child's ability to find joy even amid so much turmoil. In caring for Zoe and trying to protect her from the harsh realities of the adult world, Isabella discovered strength and compassion she had never known she had. It was during one of these visits, about a month after the shooting, that Isabella received the call she had been both dreading and hoping for. Jeremiah was awake. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of the monitors. When Isabella entered, Jeremiah lay propped up slightly, his face gaunt and pale, a shadow of the vibrant man he had once been. When he saw her, a complex mix of emotions flickered across his face: relief, shame, fear. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I didn't think you'd come." She stood at the foot of his bed, her arms crossed, and her face a mask of controlled emotion. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But we have a lot to talk about, Jeremiah. A lot that needs to be said." He nodded weakly, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he began, but Isabella held up her hand, cutting him off. "Sorry doesn't begin to cover it," she said firmly. "Do you have any idea of the damage you've caused? Not just to me, not just to Sheila and Zoe, but to everyone who believed in you, who trusted you." Jeremiah closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said softly. "It started so small. Just a little." His voice trailed off, choked by the weight of his guilt. Isabella's heart hardened as the truth of his words settled in. The small lies had grown into something far more dangerous, something that had shattered the lives of everyone involved. As she stood there, looking down at the man who had once been her everything, she realized just how far gone their lives had become. Every promise, every vow had been broken, and she could no longer ignore the mess he had left behind. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence. There was nothing more to be said. The damage had been done. Yet Isabella knew she had a choice to make, whether to turn away from him or to find some way to move forward, even if it meant facing the wreckage he had created. A small lie here, a little omission there, and before I knew it, I was caught in a web of deceit, one I couldn't escape without destroying everything. Jeremiah's voice trembled with regret as he recounted how everything spiraled out of control. Isabella listened, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to comfort him, to return to the familiar role of supportive wife. But a stronger part of her, the part that had been forged in the crucible of the past month, held firm. "You had choices, Jeremiah," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "Every step of the way, you had choices. You chose to lie. You chose to deceive. You chose to build this house of cards, knowing it would eventually come crashing down." Jeremiah nodded, his gaze falling to the floor. He made no attempt to defend himself. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I got lost. Lost in the power, in the adulation. I convinced myself I was doing God's work, that the ends justified the means. But in the process, I strayed so far from his path." For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them, filled with unspoken words and shattered dreams. Finally, Isabella spoke again, her voice soft but resolute. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said, her heart aching with the weight of her words. "I don't know if our marriage can survive this. But right now, that's not what matters. What matters is making things right, as much as they can be made right." Jeremiah looked at her, a glimmer of the intensity he once had returning to his eyes. "Tell me what to do," he said, his voice laced with both fear and a sense of desperation. "Whatever it takes, I'll do it." Isabella took a deep breath, steeling herself for the difficult road ahead. "First, you need to come clean about everything," she said firmly. "No more lies, no more half-truths. You owe that to me, to the congregation, to everyone you've deceived." Jeremiah's face showed a mix of fear and relief. He nodded, and Isabella continued, her words heavy with the gravity of the situation. "You need to face the consequences of your actions. Legal, financial, moral, all of it. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it's the only way forward." Jeremiah closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of her words. When he opened them again, there was a new resolve in his gaze, one that Isabella hadn't seen in a long time. "You're right," he said softly. "It's time to face the truth, no matter how painful." As Isabella left the hospital that day, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger still burned inside her, and hurt was ever present, but there was also a glimmer of something else, something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward healing. In the weeks and months that followed, the full story of Jeremiah Atkins and Graceful Redemption Church began to unfold. Each revelation was more painful than the last, from tearful confessions to legal proceedings and a media frenzy that seemed to feed on every new detail. Jeremiah, true to his word, held nothing back. He admitted to financial fraud, years of infidelity, and a pattern of manipulation that had touched nearly every aspect of his ministry. He pled guilty to multiple charges, accepting a prison sentence that many felt was too lenient, but which marked a sharp fall from grace for the once celebrated pastor. The church, once a beacon of hope, now found itself in a painful period of self-reflection and restructuring. Many members left, unable to reconcile their faith with the betrayal they had experienced. But a core group remained, determined to rebuild on a foundation of transparency and genuine service. Isabella, somewhat to her own surprise, found herself at the center of this renewal. Her strength, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the truth earned her the respect and trust of those who stayed. Slowly, painfully, Graceful Redemption began to live up to its name, becoming a place of healing not just for its members, but for a community that had been rocked by scandal. Through it all, at the heart of this storm of redemption and reckoning, was Zoe, the innocent little girl who had unknowingly set these events into motion. Zoe became a symbol of hope and new beginnings. With the support of Angela and even Sheila, who was serving her own sentence, albeit a shorter one, Isabella worked tirelessly to create a stable, loving environment for Zoe. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, tears, and moments of doubt. But as the years passed, wounds began to heal. The journey wasn't smooth, and the road ahead remained uncertain. Yet in the midst of all the pain and turmoil, Isabella found strength she never knew she had, and graceful redemption, slowly but surely, began to rebuild, with Zoe as a beacon of the hope that could arise from even the darkest of situations. From the ashes of betrayal and violence, a new kind of family began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't what anyone had imagined, but it was real. Built on a foundation of hard-won truths and genuine love, this family slowly began to heal. Jeremiah, serving his time and undergoing intensive therapy, watched from a distance as his daughter grew, as his former congregation found new purpose, and as the woman he had wronged so deeply became a pillar of strength for so many. It was a bittersweet reckoning, a constant reminder of what Jeremiah had lost through his own actions. Yet it was also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of genuine faith. And in the midst of it all, Isabella, who had once defined herself primarily as a pastor's wife, discovered a strength and purpose she never knew she possessed. She became a voice for accountability within religious institutions, advocating for those who had been betrayed by leaders they trusted. She became a living example of how one could find faith, not in the infallibility of human leaders, but in the enduring power of compassion, truth, and the capacity for genuine redemption. The story of Graceful Redemption Church, of Jeremiah and Isabella, of Sheila and Zoe, would be told and retold for years to come. It was a cautionary tale, yes, but also a testament to the complex, often messy nature of human relationships, the high cost of deception, and the transformative power of facing the truth, no matter how painful. In the end, it was a story of fall and redemption, of broken trust and rebuilt faith, of the long, difficult journey from betrayal to forgiveness. And at its heart was a simple truth, a truth that Jeremiah had lost sight of, but which Isabella and others had rediscovered through their trials. True grace, true redemption, doesn't come from grand gestures or charismatic leadership. It comes from the daily choice to face our flaws, to speak the truth, and to meet even the deepest betrayals with a commitment to healing and growth. As the sun set on another day in Atlanta, casting long shadows across the rebuilt and renamed Hope Restoration Community Center, formerly Graceful Redemption Church, Isabella stood for a moment, watching as the last of the day's visitors departed. Zoe, now a teenager, came to stand beside her, slipping her hand into Isabella's with the easy affection of years. "Do you think he ever really understood?" Zoe asked softly, her eyes on the fading light. "My father, I mean. Do you think he ever really got why what he did was so wrong?" Isabella squeezed the girl's hand, considering her answer carefully. "I think," she said finally, "that understanding comes in stages. Your father lost his way long before that day in the church. But I believe that, in facing the consequences of his actions and losing everything he thought was important, he's had the chance to find a truer understanding of faith, of love, of what really matters." Zoe nodded, leaning her head on Isabella's shoulder. "I'm glad you're here," she said simply. "I'm glad we found a way through all of this." Isabella felt a familiar warmth in her chest, a mixture of love for this child who had come into her life in such an unexpected way, and gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this point. It hadn't been easy, and there were still difficult days ahead. But standing there in the fading light of another day of service and healing, Isabella felt a deep sense of peace. "So am I, sweetheart," she said softly. "So am I." As they turned to go inside to close up for the night and head home, Isabella caught sight of a familiar face in the parking lot, Sheila, waiting to pick up Zoe for their weekly dinner. There was a nod of acknowledgement between the two women, a silent recognition of the long, painful road they had traveled together. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still scars, still moments of doubt and pain, but it was a real ending, one forged in the fires of truth and tempered by the enduring power of love and forgiveness. In that reality, in the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of their shared journey, there was a redemption far more powerful than anything Jeremiah had ever preached from his pulpit. As the lights of Hope Restoration dimmed, and the small family made their way home, the stars began to emerge in the Atlanta sky. They stood as a quiet reminder that even in the darkest nights, there's always light to be found if we have the courage to look for it and the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. A warm breeze rustled through the leaves of the old oak tree that stood sentinel over the small cemetery on the outskirts of Atlanta. Beneath its sprawling branches, a small group had gathered. Their faces were solemn, but not without a sense of peace. At the center of the group stood Isabella, her hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the wisdom of years that had both broken and remade her. Beside her stood Zoe, now a poised young woman in her mid-20s, with an arm around her mother. Time and shared struggles had softened the edges of their once fractured relationship, forging an unconventional but fiercely loyal family unit. They were there to say their final goodbye to Jeremiah Atkins. Released from prison 5 years earlier, he had spent his remaining days working in a small ministry for ex-offenders, trying his own way to make amends for the damage he had caused. His death had come suddenly, a heart attack in the night, leaving behind a complex legacy of pain, redemption, and unfinished business. As the minister spoke words of comfort and reflection, Isabella's mind drifted back over the tumultuous decade that had passed since that fateful day at Graceful Redemption Church. Those years had been filled with challenges, moments of doubt and despair, but also unexpected joys and hard-won victories. Hope Restoration Community Center had flourished, becoming a beacon of genuine service and healing in the community. Isabella had found her true calling, not as a pastor's wife, but as a leader in her own right. She had guided the center with a combination of compassion and clear-eyed pragmatism, earning the respect of all who knew her. Sheila, after serving her sentence, had thrown herself into advocacy work, using her own story to shed light on the complex issues of domestic violence and the often overlooked struggles of single mothers. Her journey from villain to voice of change had been arduous, marked by setbacks and moments of deep remorse, but she had persevered, finding purpose in helping others avoid the desperate choices she had made. Zoe, the innocent child caught in the center of the storm, had grown into a remarkable young woman. Shaped by the unconventional circumstances of her upbringing, she had developed a deep empathy for those society often overlooked. She channeled her experiences into a budding career in social work, determined to make a difference. As the service concluded and the small group began to disperse, Isabella found herself standing alone before Jeremiah's grave. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Zoe, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Are you okay?" Zoe asked softly, slipping her hand into Isabella's. Isabella squeezed her hand, a sad smile touching her lips. "I don't know what I am," she admitted. "There's so much I never got to say to him, so much left unresolved." Zoe nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Do you regret not trying to reconcile after he got out of prison?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I don't think regret is the right word," she said finally. "I made my choices just as he made his. I couldn't find it in myself to let him back into my life, not fully. But I'm grateful that he found a way to do some good in the end, that he tried to make amends. He wasn't a good man," Zoe said, her voice tinged with the complexity of emotions that came with being Jeremiah's daughter. "But he wasn't all bad either, was he?" Isabella shook her head. "No, he wasn't. He was human, flawed, selfish, capable of great harm, but also capable of love, of growth. In the end, I think he tried." They stood there together, the weight of the years and the complexity of their feelings settling over them like a blanket. Both of them had learned that healing wasn't a linear process. There were still many unanswered questions, but they had come to understand that redemption, in all its messy and complicated beauty, didn't always come in the form they'd hoped for. It came in small moments, in quiet realizations, and in the strength they found in each other. And, above all, in the decision to keep moving forward. Isabella understood the damage Jeremiah had done. Whether that was enough for redemption, though, was not for them to decide. They stood there in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. The weight of everything they had lived through hung heavily in the air between them. Finally, Isabella turned, ready to leave, but Zoe hesitated. With a quiet movement, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn Bible. "I found this in his things," she explained. "It was the one he used in prison. I thought maybe you'd want to have it." Isabella took the Bible, her fingers brushing over the cracked leather cover. She opened it gently, and, as she did, a slip of paper fell out. It was a handwritten note in Jeremiah's familiar scrawl. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and read aloud. "Isabella, I know these words can never undo the hurt I've caused, but I need you to know that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. I lost my way, lost sight of what truly mattered, and in doing so, I lost the most precious gift God ever gave me, your love and trust. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that the work you're doing, the lives you're changing, it's everything I once dreamed of for our ministry. You've taken our broken dreams and built something beautiful from the pieces. I am more proud of you than I can ever express, and more grateful than you will ever know for the way you've cared for Zoe. You are the truest example of God's love and grace that I have ever known. Always, Jeremiah." Tears slipped down Isabella's cheeks as she folded the note and tucked it back into the Bible. She hugged the book to her chest, feeling a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying begin to lift. "Are you okay?" Zoe asked softly, concern evident in her voice. Isabella nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes," she said, surprised to find that she meant it. "Yes, I think I am." As they walked away from the grave, arm in arm, Isabella felt a profound sense of closure washing over her. The past decade had been a journey she never could have anticipated, one filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and challenges. From betrayed wife to community leader, from victim to victor, she had lost much, but in return, she had gained so much more. A deeper understanding of herself, a more nuanced faith, and a family forged in the fires of adversity. The sun was setting as they reached the car, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Sheila was waiting for them, a tentative smile on her face. The three women exchanged a glance. No words were necessary. Their shared history was a complex tapestry of pain and healing, mistakes and forgiveness. "Ready to go home?" Sheila asked softly. Isabella nodded, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." As they drove away, leaving behind the physical reminder of Jeremiah and all he had represented, Isabella felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road had been long and often painful, but it had led her to this point, a place of strength, purpose, and genuine love. The story of Graceful Redemption Church, of the pastor who fell from grace, and of the lives left in the wake of his actions would always be a part of her. But it no longer defined her. What defined her now was the work she did each day, the lives she touched, and the love she shared with her unconventional but deeply bonded family. As the Atlanta skyline came into view, Isabella thought about the next day's work at Hope Restoration. She thought about the new programs they were developing, about the countless stories of healing and redemption she witnessed every day, and she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that this messy, beautiful, real life was the truest expression of grace she had ever known. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched out before them, full of possibility. And Isabella, along with Zoe and Sheila, was ready to meet it, stronger, wiser, and more full of genuine hope than she had ever been before. As they pulled up to the house they now shared, a home filled with laughter and love, despite the painful journey that had brought them together, Isabella felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was not the life she had once envisioned, but it was a life rich with meaning, with purpose, and with love. And in the end, she realized that was the greatest redemption of all. If this story left you questioning the darkest sides of human nature, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more true crime stories that dive deep into shocking betrayals, tragedies, and the consequences of hidden secrets. Join us as we explore the twisted tales that reveal the true complexity of humanity. Subscribe now and stay tuned for new content.